Oh,
Here we are, yes. Having just opened a bottle of champagne that was a little more rambunctious than we expected. But that's all right. It's Halloween.
Okay.
All right. I'll tell you what, Philip, I'll take over on that, and you can say hello to everybody.
I'll get out of the way.
Okay.
Oh.
Oh, except that the camera is blocked.
No, that's okay. We are just doing the introduction and all.
Oh. Okay. Well, I can't see me
Have a seat.
otherwise.
Yes, you were.
Oh, there I am. Yeah. Okay. I'm here. Yeah, this is all very professional. This is the kind of thing where we all say, what's going on here? You know, and the camera's kind of being thrown at. Welcome to the salon for October. This October 30th, the end of the month, and for the obligatory Halloween show. But it's a little different than some because I like to show things that are unusual, and one of these films many of you will have seen because it is up on the Library of Congress's streaming website, and it's been out in various versions since its rediscovery some 20 odd years ago. The other one I don't think anybody has seen at least in its correct order since 1915. So anyway, let's get on with it. The program today will consist of an overture, which I may as well play now. It's, well, the Danse Macabre by Camille Saint-Saëns, and it's an unusual recording. It's a British recording by the Goossens Orchestra, conducted by Eugene Goossens, who was conductor of the Rochester Philharmonic from 1925 until 1934, I believe. He went to, or 31, excuse me, in 1931 he went to Cincinnati. Goossens was a very important conductor, a very important British conductor, from a line of conductors, all named Eugene. He was actually Eugene Goossens III. His father was Eugene Goossens II and was still conducting while his son was building up his reputation, and his father had been Eugene Goossens I and had been a conductor in Brussels and elsewhere. That's where the family derived from. So Eugene Goossens was a composer as well, a fairly notable composer, and his siblings were as famous as he was. Probably the most famous of his siblings was Leon Goossens, the oboist, who revolutionized modern oboe playing, notably in his use of vibrato and a more expressive approach to the oboe, which got him in trouble with the British, who found his style a little too sentimental. The British oboe style of the 19th and early 20th century was a very straight and fairly penetrating tone. And Leon Goossens was largely responsible for changing that over time through the championship of the conductor Sir Thomas Beecham, who preferred Goossens to all other oboists in Britain at the time. The recording is by Goossens' own orchestra that he brought together out of the pool of London players, who were almost always ad hoc for any gig in London because of the deputy system, where you could sub practically anywhere at a moment's notice. But Goossens managed to get a semi-permanent group together, and he made about 8 recordings, maybe 10, for the Edison Bell label, which has nothing whatsoever to do with Edison. Everything else on the program is directly due to Edison. However, Edison Bell started out as a company distributing Edison products. They got into legal trouble with the parent company back in the United States, and J.E. Hoff, who was the proprietor of Edison Bell, managed not only to win his case against Edison, but to be able to retain the name Edison himself, so that Edison Bell has nothing whatsoever to do with Edison. Edison himself went ahead and had his own company named Edison in the United Kingdom. But as it turned out, Edison Bell lasted longer in the United Kingdom than Edison himself, through a better approach to marketing and some interesting things. So this is Eugene Goossens conducting the Danse Macabre with Goossens Orchestra on Edison Bell's Velvet Face label. That was their high-end label for acoustical recordings, released in August 1922.
And now we'll play musical chairs.
Okay.
Because among other things, you might want to be able to see the record. You know what? We're gonna put this here. I don't usually stand the camera here because it would be standing in the way.
please. Again, that was the Danse Macabre by Cuvier Saint-Saëns, played by Goossens Orchestra under the conductorship of Eugene Goossens III, recorded for the Edison Bell Company of London, released August 1922. Now on to the films. We have a double bill. The first film, which many of you may have seen in various incarnations, but certainly I urge you also to see this through the Library of Congress's website, which I will mention why in a moment, is the 1910 Edison Manufacturing Company version of Frankenstein. This film was long thought lost, and when I was a boy, I read Anthony Slide's Early American Cinema, and there is an illustration in it from the April 15th, 1910 issue of the London Edison Kinetogram, which on the cover has Scene from Frankenstein, and it has Charles Ogle looking really creepy to an 11-year-old going, and it really creeped me out. And I wanted to see this because I was of a kind of macabre disposition. Well, I found out at that time the film did not exist. However, in the late 1990s, it surfaced in the collection of a rather unusual and certainly extensive collector named Al Detlef in New Jersey. And this was an international sensation. It's strange to think of why, because it's a one-reel production. It only lasts about 12 minutes, but it is the iconic first screen version, as far as we know, of Mary Shelley's story. And it was adapted and directed by J. Searle Dawley, who lived from 1877 to 1949, and had been brought up in Colorado and was an Edison staff director. He'd been brought on to the Edison staff in 1907 by Edwin S. Porter, as Edison's output was increasing and he needed somebody else to help with going on. Also, unlike Porter, Dawley had extensive stage experience, so that he was able to bring a little more dramatic quality to the films that Porter was rather uncomfortable with. Edwin S. Porter was a great filmmaker, but he was very much a technician. Dawley was a pretty good storyteller. And in this film, it's not quite the earliest Dawley film to exist, but you can see that he actually has a great deal of control over the mise-en-scène and how the camera is directed. In fact, because of the use of mirrors in this, and mirrors play a very important part in this story, one is tempted to think that he may have seen some of the Danish productions that were just beginning to be imported into the United States by the Great Northern Film Company. These were productions by Nordisk in Denmark. And one of the highlights of Danish silent cinema before the First World War was an extensive use of mirrors in various shots to show different points of view. And in fact, this use did permeate certain elements of American filmmaking, including at the Vitagraph Company. Van Dyke Brook, who was one of the Vitagraph directors, used mirrors. This is one of the earliest uses of mirrors, though, in a dramatic sense in an American film, which means that Dawley is moving his camera around from position. In other words, he's not filming straight on into the set, but he's actually moving it to different points on the set, which is a somewhat unusual tack for a film of 1910. It looks very good. There is some money spent on the sets, which are nevertheless painted sets, and you'll see a little wobble, as was customary for American production at the time. But it is creatively filmed. Also, it's lavishly tinted. The tints are what are most surprising in some ways about the film. And it's, as it's told in the opening title, this is a loose adaptation. There's not much that you can get in 15 minutes. But it is interesting for some of the sexual overtones that take place in Dawley's adaptation. They're very light, but there is action that takes place on the bridal night. And the other thing about it is that Dawley really handles the actors well. They're not named. It was customary for Edison not to name players at this point. They started doing so in 1911. But the lead actors are Charles Ogle as the monster, Augustus Phillips as Frankenstein, and Mary Fuller as his fiancée, then bride. And Mary Fuller went on to become Edison's first star, notably in what is sometimes considered the first serial, What Happened to Mary, which came out in 1912, and which most of survives. And the other thing about What Happened to Mary is it's not entirely a serial, it's a series of films, because each was self-contained and building up to a climax. But it put Edison, for once, at the forefront of production, at a time when it really needed to do that. In fact, from about 1908 through 1913-14, Edison rose very rapidly to become one of the major film companies in terms of quality and standard of production. Their studio in the Bronx was technically as well equipped as any in the country, and as well as practically any in Europe. And the players were very good. Many of them stayed for a long time. And they had a turnover of directors. Dawley went on from Edison to direct with Edwin S. Porter at the famous Players Film Company, and did a number of films for them before going on to other ventures. And then coming back, actually, to Famous Players, where he did a series of films with Marguerite Clark, the most famous of which, because it's one of the few that is extant, is the first screen version of Snow White in 1916. So, the other thing I should say about Frankenstein, because it may take you by surprise, Frankenstein does go to college, and this film proves that in 2 years you can discover the secret of life. Just let you know, this is both a plug for higher education and also a warning against the dangers of higher education. Don't go farther than your teachers tell you to do. So, that is Frankenstein. The second film is our feature, which is also made by Edison. Edison was the last of the pioneer companies involved in the Motion Picture Patents Company to get into full-length feature production, partially because of the studio managers. The studio managers were pretty stupid, frankly. One of them was Horace Plimpton, who was in charge at the time The Magic Skin was filmed, and they were from fields that had very little to do with motion picture making. Plimpton, who other players, notably Viola Dana, had nothing but disdain for, was a carpet salesman before he joined the Edison Company. And Dawley had interactions with Plimpton that were almost absurd. Dawley took a company to the West Coast to establish an Edison outpost there, and en route he was going to do some filming, and they took a large costume company with them, and they were going to film, and did film, a version of The Charge of the Light Brigade in 1912. And as he was about to depart, Plimpton queried him about The Charge of the Light Brigade, and Dawley said, yes, we're planning to do it. And Plimpton said, well, all right, but not too much blood, Dawley. It isn't nice. That was Horace Plimpton. Eventually, he was fired, which you would think would be a good thing, except that the person that they brought in was a man named L.W. McChesney, who had come from the advertising department of the phonograph division. Now, and had no experience in film at all. And that was when Edison started to go on a spiral downhill and eventually ceased production in 1918. But The Magic Skin was one of the earliest full-length features the company made. It's the second feature on what was the Klein Edison Feature Service, a distribution system that was devised by pioneer filmmaker and distributor George Klein. The first production had been the company's longest film to that point, a 7-reel version of Vanity Fair with the actress Minnie Maddern-Fisk, who was one of the top American actresses of her day. And it had been directed by Eugene Nolan and mostly by Charles Braben, who became a very important director later on. The Magic Skin was directed by Richard Ridgely, who had been born in Cynthiana, Kentucky in 1869 and had gone through the stage to film business that had usually defined directors in the business, and had become Edison's chief dramatic director in 1913. He also did the scenarios for most of his films and did scenarios for others' films. Probably his most important function at Edison was fostering the career of John Hancock Collins, who was by a considerable margin the most important director ever to come out of Edison. Collins came into the business and he did set design working in the library, and then Ridgely took him on as assistant director. I don't believe he did anything on The Magic Skin, because by that time Collins was already directing on his own. But The Magic Skin is a very interesting film in that it is the first screen adaptation by any story by Honoré de Balzac. In this case, Un peu de chagrin from 1831. And it's a moralistic tale. And that was noted in the trade journals of the day as being very, very upper class to do something like this. And to do this, they brought in a stage actor, Everett Butterfield, to play Rafe Valentine, who is a musician. This is very much a musically based film. Butterfield was an interesting character in himself in that he played over 700 roles on the stage. He was a noted Broadway actor, and this was a sign that Edison was trying to upgrade their product. But Butterfield only made 3 films. This one for Edison, which was his screen debut, another one almost concurrently, or certainly just subsequently, for the Thanhouser Company, and a third for the Ivan Film Productions Company. And that was it. He enlisted, became a lieutenant in the Army during the First World War, saw considerable action in France and was decorated. He came back and went back on the stage, never looked at doing another film. And it may have been through injuries he suffered in the war that he came to a rather early end. He died at the age of 40 in 1925. He's just 30 in this film. It's a sad thing because he certainly had promise, and he plays a bit to the camera, but he's appealing, and he does a very good job of this. The other players, Mabel Trunell, who is his sweetheart, gets second billing to Butterfield, but she really doesn't have a great deal to do. She's his moral pinning, as it were, his true love. The actress who I'm more interested in, which most people get interested in, is the kind of vamp character, Flora Margot, which is played, the part is played by Sally Croot, who did similar roles for Edison, notably in The Cossack Whip in 1916, which was a John Collins production. And she's got a real sensuality about her, and abandon, which Ridgely allows to come out in the film. The fact is that the reviews were uniformly good on this film, and had phrases, as I quoted in Facebook, where Butterfield reaches a degeneracy that makes him the devil's own. And you get to see the devil in this. He's not just a pigment of your incineration. He comes into this. The story of Un Pot de Chagrin is very much a Faustian story mixed with a little bit of Oscar Wilde, who probably just took Balzac as his basis as well for the picture of Dorian Gray. But you might see that as a direct influence here. A couple of things about Ridgely's style, because nobody's ever talked about Richard Ridgely as a film director. The Edison style was usually to film into a set to 3/4 length, that is, to the knees. And there are very few close-ups in this film, but there are also full-length shots, and within shots where characters are present, and they cut from characters in a long shot to a medium or close-up shot, sometimes Ridgely uses a rather interesting device. He dissolves. He doesn't do a quick cut in the classical Hollywood fashion. He dissolves over them, which is a practice that you would associate more with the British filmmaker Cecil Hepworth, except that Ridgely uses it much more effectively and quickly. So it doesn't really get in your way, narratively speaking. Money was spent on this production. It's quite lavishly staged. There are some outdoor scenes, and certainly Flora Margot's salon is extremely lavish, where Valentine, after he goes into his bargain, enjoys himself to excess. You'll sometimes see him fiddle in his pocket for a pill, and I expect what he's taking was nitroglycerin pills for his heart, because he's running himself down to the bottom of degeneracy. But other than that, I think we should just go into the films themselves. There will be a brief break between them because there is some background on Frankenstein. The score that you can see streaming on Frankenstein through the Library of Congress's website, and which will be credited on the screen here or on your viewing device, is by Donald Souza, my good friend and colleague, and is excellent. I just wanted to have a turn at it myself. I did play for it at the time it was rediscovered and projected in Sicily, Italy, but I haven't had a chance to do it since then, so it's been a good 25 years or so. But I hope you enjoy both Frankenstein followed by The Magic Skin. And thank George Williman also for getting these to me, and also for putting The Magic Skin back into order. It had come as part of a parcel of films that were bought from the estate of George Klein back in the 1940s. And some of them were not in the best condition when they came. And there's still a lot more to be explored in that. They have not been largely looked at since they came into the collections nearly 70 years ago. So, thank you, and we'll start with Frankenstein, followed by The Magic Skin.
All right, and a little more musical chairs if everybody can get lights and curtains.
Yep.
Duck under here, and I think we'll go ahead.
Sure. Where would you like to be?
I noticed something on the floor here. Is this
Oh,
yours?
that's my phone. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Getting ourselves settled here. It
Oh.
looks like we're about
Should
ready.
I uncover the...
Yes, uncover
Probably a
that.
good idea.
Oh,
And
myself
as
out of the
soon
way.
as, Philip, as soon as you give the word, I will, okay. And play.
understand until somebody could
Yeah,
get the
and
reels out of
people,
it.
like,
Yeah.
open up the curtains and turn on the lights again.
Yeah.
So you can see something in
Here we
here.
go, and you can have your chair
Excellent.
back.
Well, it's just, I was going to say a couple of last things. The film that you just saw, The Magic Skin, was released on October 13th, 1915, and there was a puff put out by the Edison Studios that they were wrapping up filming at the Bronx studio around the 25th of September. It was probably shot very quickly, within 2 or 3 weeks, knowing Edison's schedules at the time. So it was probably shot starting around the 1st of September at the very latest. This is possibly Ridgely's best film. I've not seen many of them. I know that some of them are not very well thought of. One thing I forgot to mention about Dolly, who directed Frankenstein, is probably his most famous Edison film, besides Frankenstein, is Rescued from an Eagle's Nest, with D.W. Griffith in the leading role, and a giant flying mechanical eagle designed by Richard Murphy, which has been sometimes derided, but it's actually quite clever. Richard Murphy went on to become the first set designer at Famous Players in 1912. As for The Magic Skin, it was fairly popular in other places other than the United States. I think it played better overseas than it did in the United States. There is a memo or a note that was received by Edison concerning another Edison melodrama called Heart of the Hills, which the exhibitor said, there's no way we're going to take that title because it sounds like a rural melodrama. It isn't. Actually, the Heart of the Hills is a diamond and the film is set in India. But they said, we're not going to take it because we have these great films and some lousy titles. Remember the Case of the Magic Skin? And that's been the only documentation so far that has been uncovered on it, though that there are more Edison papers in various places, in New York, at Rutgers University, and so forth. Dolly's papers are very interesting. He wrote a memoir of his time in the business, but they've never been published, and they should be. I'd love to read them, because the few quotes I've read from Dolly's memos are very, they're pungent as to what he said about the business. He tried to convince Edison into going into longer filmmaking earlier than they did, but when the notices were relayed back to West Orange, where Edison was, Edison had very little to do with the studio in New York. He said that people won't sit for 2 real pictures. Well, now we're going into 3-hour films, like Tar, and so forth, about music. And I think that's been pretty well disproven. And it was disproven even in 1915 with several epics on the circulating through theaters. Anyway, that's our presentation for today. Ask me any questions you want through email or through Facebook. And I hope you enjoyed it, and happy Halloween. Thank you for being with us.